Hello guys, in the following video we'll be going over Notion's recently launched public beta API. This API will finally give us developers the ability to integrate Notion with our own services or applications, making it possible to do things such as automations, integrating Notion with a chatbot, or with a third-party service that is not currently available with Notion or that is not currently integrated directly with Notion. This, of course, as I mentioned, is still in beta, so there are a lot of things missing. However, in this video we'll be going over what is possible right now. So let's get started. For the things we'll be doing in this video, we will be using Notion's official JavaScript SDK, which at the moment is the only SDK available for this API. However, you can consume this API from basically any programming language as long as you know how to consume a REST API from that language, as there is enough documentation available to do so. So let's take a quick look on what we will need to do. We will need to run an npm install of this library right here, Notion HQ/client, and then as you can see we just import it and we use our Notion token, which is an API token we will be getting later in this video, and we can make requests just like this, unlock the responses, or do whatever we need with this. So I'll leave the link to this in the description, and now let's see how to get our own API token. So to get our own API tokens, we will need to go to notion.so/myintegrations, like this link right here, and to access this page we will need to be already logged in. So once we are logged in, we can click this create new integration button, and we can give this integration a name. In this case I'll give it, for example, my integration test key, and I'll click submit. In this case we are given our secret, which is hidden by default, the name of the integration, and the integration type, which I will leave as an internal integration because I will only be using it for workspaces where I am the administrator. So I will click show to this integration token in order to copy it, and I will blur it in the video. I'm mentioning this because in your case you should not be sharing this API token with anyone, because once you do, they will have access to your Notion workspaces, to all the workspaces that you give permission to this API token, to be more specific. So I'll click show, and now I'll click copy. This is already copied to my clipboard, and now we will be going to the code in JavaScript in order to consume the API. So before we start, we need to verify that we have installed Node.js 14 or above in our machine, because as you can see here in the requirements, they mention that we should have that installed. So in my case, I'll just go to a console in Visual Studio Code, and I'll just type node flag v, and I can see that I have installed the version 15, so I'm good to go. In case you don't have it installed, you just go to Node.js how to install, and you will see the latest version available, which at this time is version 16, I think. So once we have that, let's copy this npm install command. Let's do an npm init and pass the y flag to initialize it with the default values. And now let's paste this npm install Notion HQ client. Also, let's install faker and .env. And while those two things are being installed, I'll explain you what are those .env files that I have right here. So in your case, you will only need to create this .env file, and this is where we store the API token. This file, in case you are committing this to a Git repository, should be in your git ignore. So in case you have a repository, you will have this git ignore and have a .env right here for this file to not be committed. So here you will store your API key, just like this. You'll put API token equals, and whatever you copied from Notion, you will paste it right here. In my case, I'm showing you the .env.example because I should not be showing you my token. So the next thing we will be doing is creating our index.js file, which is the file that we will use to consume the Notion's API. So first, let's get the client, let's do a require of Notion HQ / client, which is what we just installed, and let's get client from this. Now let's create a variable Notion, and we do new client, and we pass a parameter of auth process.env.api token. Then we create a function, an asynchronous function called main. We call main right here, and here we can do something like, for example, let's list the users, wait, Notion dot users dot list, and let's print this. We do node index, and this fails. This fails because I forgot to do a require of .env.config. Without doing this, this process.env.api token is undefined, and therefore if we don't pass a token, we don't have access to anything. Now that we do this, we see that we get a different response. Here we can see that we get my user, and we get a lot of bots, which are Notion describes a bot as one of your integrations or API tokens. I created a bunch to test a few things. So here they are. And also here is my current user. In your case, in case you only create one, you should only see your user and your integration or bot mentioned right here. So after this, let's go to the browser and let's go to Notion. Now let's create a new page. Let's create this as for example a test, and let's create here a database. Create a database, a full page database. In this case, for example, let's name this database as clients. Once we create it, let's copy this ID right here, this thing after the slash and before the question mark. This is the ID of this database. So let's come to our code. Let's put this in a constant. Let's create, for example, database ID equals to this thing I just copied. And here now let's create a table for our clients. So for example, I'll have the name, I'll leave it like this. I'll put, for example, here an email, and let's change the type of this to be of an email. Let's put a phone number. Let's change the type of this as well to be a phone. And let's have another field, like for example, is this client subscribed to our newsletters, for example. And this will be a checkbox. Let's put it right here. So an example of an entry for this will be like, for example, John Doe, john@doe.com, 1 2 3 4 5 6, and this person is subscribed to our newsletter. Let's delete everything below of this. And now the idea of the program we will be creating is one that adds new customers, new clients to this database without us needing to manually log into Notion and do it ourselves. This will allow us to, for example, get the clients from an existing database in another service and pass it directly into Notion. So let's see how we can do that. And for our next step, we will need to go to developers.notion.com, and in this case we will be going to the API reference. Here we can see the documentation for every endpoint available in the API right now. As you can see, there are not many, and there are still things missing, such as deleting things from a database or from a page. As you can see, we can only get things and create things. In the case of the page, we cannot create database right now. And when we click on any of these things, we can see examples of how this is done. For example, this is how you query how you query a database, and using CURL or the Notion SDK for JavaScript, which is what we are using in this video. When we click on the CURL example, you can see why I mentioned earlier that you can do this in any programming language, even if it doesn't have an SDK yet, because in the end this is just an RESTful API and you can consume it like any other RESTful API you have already consumed in that language. So take that into consideration and see the documentation in case you want to do it that way. For what we need, we actually want to use the page object. To be more specific, the create page endpoint. Why is this? Well, even though we want to insert things inside a database, and you might think that we would like to use something inside the database endpoints, this is actually a page, what we are doing here. As you can see here, I can open this as a page. So it makes sense that to add something to that database, we are actually creating a page from the endpoint. So before we go to the code, we actually need to give our integration permissions to access this page. So let's go to the parent, to test, and let's click on share. Here I can add people, and in this case I will add my integration test key, which is the one I created for this video. So I click on invite, and now let's see how this is done. So to create a page, an example for this is calling notion.pages.create with the parent using the database ID that we copied earlier, and then the properties of what we need to create. In this case, this name, description, etc. are the names of the columns of our database. So let's see an example. Let's say that, for example, I want to do notion.pages.create parent database ID, and I put the database ID here, and then I use the properties field and say, for example, name. Name is of type title, and title receives here an array which receives here a property of type text, and text itself receives here a type of content. And here is where you will actually type the name of the customer. We will see now why the name needs to be nested inside all of these fields. So for example, let's type here John Doe from API. As you can see, that person is not created yet, but when I run this, I run node index, this says name is not a property that exists, because I typed it all caps, so capitalization needs to be taken into consideration when doing this. And now you can see that John Doe from API was already created, so this is great. If I run this again, we see another one. So this is working properly. And why did we have to do it this way? Well, if we go to the page object, we can see all the things that we can insert right here. And to be more specific, we can see it in properties. So if we go to properties, we can see all the values that this can have. In this case, we used the title value right here. All of these values are the types that you can choose from this select right here of the types of values that your columns can have. And now if we go to title, the properties of title is just a rich text object. So this is why we type title, and then we have to put it to pass an array, because the API mentions that we need to use an array, and the array needs to be a rich text object. This is a rich text object. If we go here, we can see that we are passing here the type. So the type of the rich text object goes here. In this case, it can be text, mention, or equation. And if we go to text, we can see that it can have either content or a link. So in this case, I'm passing the content right here, and if I type a comma, I can add also a link. As you can see, it auto-completes it because this API is strongly typed thanks to TypeScript, which it is using behind the scenes. So you can see that the documentation is actually working fine. Okay, so once we have that solved, let's also delete this. And now let's see how we can add all the other fields missing from our database. So we need to add an email, a phone number, and a checkbox. So we will go again to the page object. We will find how to add an email. In this case, it just needs a property of email with the string that describes the email address. So I will do exactly that. We are typing here email exactly how I typed it here with the capital E. And then here I type, for example, john@doe.com. Then the phone number, I'll type phone number as well. As you can see right here, it mentions that I need to just put the field phone number, and I'll type a phone number. And in the case of the checkbox, the name that I gave to this is subscribe newsletter. In this case, you see that we have a space here, so we need to actually put this like this. And then we put checkbox, we can pass true or false. So let's run this and let's see what happens. We see that this is not a property that exists. Subscribe newsletter. And now it worked. And as you can see, everything I just inserted has been added to the database. So this is working. Now, if you remember from the beginning of this video, I installed Faker. And I did so because I want to create a small script that will actually insert a fake customer every time I run this index.js file. So let's do that right now and see what happens. Okay, so I created this generate client function, which returns the name, the email, the phone, and if the client is subscribed or not. And here I am destructuring the return of this function, and I am substituting the hard-coded values that I had here for everything that this function is returning. So now if I run node index, we can see that we are creating random clients in our database. So this seems to be working fine. In this case, the clients are generated thanks to this Faker library. However, this generate client function can be anything. You can be obtaining these clients from a real database or from another service or from whatever you want. So yeah, this is basically a small demo of the Notions API. So this has been it for this video. If you've got any questions, please leave it in the comments and I'll be answering them as soon as I can. Also, remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel in case you like this, because I will be uploading more Notion API tutorials in the future, doing more advanced things like integrations with, for example, Telegram's API or with a real backend that we will be building. So yeah, leave a like and let me know if you want me to do anything else with this API, and I'll see you in the next